I'm a little bit early, but great games at your table. This is Jonathan Albin, and this is Game Master Soapbox. If my sound is working properly, cool. If you are hearing any weird noises, make sure to let me know because I'm trying to make it as easy to hear as possible. I know I had some challenges the other day with picking up resonant noises from the room, so if I'm doing fine, let me know, and if I'm causing difficulties or challenges, let me know as well. Today we're going to be talking about the 10 most dangerous monsters in role-playing games, and I'm speaking perhaps to the choir here, so to speak. Because I'm going to be talking about what is dangerous to the player, so to speak, or rather to the character, not to the player, because ultimately the fear that a game master generates within his player base is really dependent upon how much he instills fear in the players about the survivability of their persona, their characters, or whatever. So if he isn't generating a nervousness or a fear that is tangible, then it's relatively useless because unless the players feel the danger, there is no danger. So perhaps, as I said, I'll be speaking to the choir on these, but as we go through them, I'm listing them not in any priority order in terms of the most dangerous, except for the very last one. I think that the last one that I'll mention is by far and away the most dangerous monster type in any role-playing game that's ever been created. So let's get started, shall we? So, in terms of what are dangerous monsters, I guess you'd say the most obvious would be those that are insta-kill and are dependent upon a single die roll to mean the doom of the characters. Now, fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons does away with this rather considerably because it makes petrification a multiple step process so that it's harder to accomplish than the simple die roll that was familiar. But I'm not speaking of role-playing games in a specific sense. I'm not speaking of the danger that it applies only in the 5th edition game. I'm speaking of what are the most dangerous monsters in role-playing games. And if you are playing with the Medusa and the Basilisk as they are intentionally to be used, they are absolutely lethal and can TPK like nobody's business, especially if they have an intention, if they have a purpose of doing so. Pardon me for eating in between, but I actually was running a game earlier tonight, so I haven't had time to properly feed myself. So if you're sitting at home and you want to, go ahead and grab something to eat as well. I don't mind. If I had the opportunity, I would share with you all. So I guess I could put this up next to the microphone in case you can smell the aroma of bratwurst, but I don't think that has an effect. Well, now, Medusa and Basilisk. When we speak of Medusa, of course, we're talking about the classic Greek version. The idea of a gorgon, or a creature that can convert a person from flesh to stone instantaneously with nothing but a saving throw protecting them. These are devastating no matter, even if you're talking about the stone gorgons, the classic bullock-shaped ones. So think of this, when I speak of Medusa, I speak of any of the gorgon types. That's a great point, Strigley. The trick with player involvement, is that if you are going to play with players that do metagame, then you simply have to redefine the monster, clarify. Oh no, I get you. I get what you're saying. Um, in those terms. Hang on a second. Right. No, exactly. So when players are meta playing and they're using information that the persona should not know, but that the player does, that has to be a completely separate conversation because it's difficult to play a scene if the actor, for example, knows what's going to happen in the scene as compared to when they don't. As a matter of fact, in a lot of Hollywood direction, the directors actually will tell the actors things that are not true or things that are going to be a surprise in the scene to get a more natural response. And so when you're in a position where you're going to be playing with players that are reasonably sure that they know about the Greek myth, then certainly you want to play a different theme or change out the monsters. Yep. That's the great broadcast default answer, is to always say, well, it's not the way it works here. But I would go further, and that is I would totally expect them to try things, and sometimes I'll actually completely reverse it so that it's not whether or not you see the monster, it's whether the monster sees you. So if you're standing up with a shield and you're holding it up there so that the monster can see you, then it's the monster's gaze, even if it's reflected, that gets them. So therefore hold their feet to the fire. And if that's really too harsh for them, then they don't need to be playing this game. I mean, one of the biggest challenges that I've had recently is dealing with players who want to have trigger warnings and want the adventure to not include the things that personally scare them or whatever. To which I say the reason why you're playing a role play game is to play through or pretend through a situation that you normally wouldn't, so that you can show how courageous and brave you are. Your very reason for being there is to be triggered. Because we learn to adapt to the situations we're in only when we test ourselves. And a role play scene is precisely that, a way to test it. So the second kind of monster that is the most dangerous are probably the ones that are so patently obvious I probably don't need to include them. And that is the world killers. The Tarrasque, which was built specifically to kill players. The Kaiju, which of course is here to destroy entire nations. And of course the Galactuses of the universe, the world eaters, the ones that are here to consume whole planets. These are obviously the most dangerous monsters that are in the game. These big bads are world breakers. Obviously they are story killers. Obviously, they are game enders if they go badly. So, if you're going to play with them, then find ways to make them not the focus. In other words, the Tarrasque is here to eat a certain artifact, or the Kaiju is here to punish a land for something, or the World Eater is not after this world but another one and just was stopping by to be scary. Any of these causes can make the monsters survivable, but if they are used in full strength and at full power, for the most part, they are going to be the most dangerous creatures in role-playing games. And I would argue that they're not really role-playing in that case. You're actually role dice rolling instead of role playing in that situation, because you're just simply seeing whether or not your players can resolve the situation before they're dead. To me, this idea of a dangerous monster is actually kind of lazy, because it takes away player agency, it limits and restricts the environment of the play, and prevents the players from finding alternatives that might be more pleasant and arguably more insightful. So they're not by my stretch the most popular of the dangerous monsters, but they definitely rank way up there in terms of who are the most powerful, most dangerous. Now these, when I speak of plague carriers and vermin swarms, you never even heard of the Tarask Kaiju or World Eater? Okay, so the World Eater is not specifically defined. It's just a thought engine. But the Kaiju are, if you want to use other terms, you're talking about Gojira, you're talking about the Megalon, the big monsters that come. According to Japanese mythos, the Kaiju are the spirits of the earth that are sent to punish man for mankind's waywardness. So the fact that we're not good stewards of the planet, the Kaiju come and wipe out our world to take it back to a natural, even state, so it can be restarted and regrown. The Tarask is a monster that was specifically designed by the designers of Dungeons and Dragons to kill characters. It was literally a one monster wrecking ball, and it's when you look it up in the book, you'll be amazed in the monster manual what it all can do. It really is a terrifying thing. Now, onto the plague carriers and vermin swarms. These are only dangerous in the game if you play them as they are intended. It's similar to the concept that I said earlier about the Medusa and Basilisk. In other words, if the plague carriers are coming and they have the capability of destroying the world population by infecting and murdering millions of people, by far they are one of the most dangerous monsters out there. Historically, vermin swarms are responsible for a large percentage of the deaths in the world. When you think of the Black Plague and diseases like that, it was the rats and the fleas that the rats carried that were the source and cause of so much death and destruction. And if those are able to break out, no differently than the arguments that were made about COVID being a world killer, an actual plague that could actually wipe out millions of people is a greater threat than the others we've talked about, just in sheer numbers of deaths. So played properly, a campaign about stopping the vectors of plagues can be exciting and challenging and rather thought-provoking, because the players have to think in a different way to find ways to stop this spread, to actually study vector dynamics and stuff, and how the various plagues advance. Makes for a very fascinating RPG, and not necessarily something that the players will have played before, so consider that as a possibility when you're talking about having dangerous monsters, because even the players might be infected, and so that can make for a very interesting role play to actually decide how they're going to survive it. The next one is arguably specifically a problem for role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, and that is the vampires, wights, and other energy-draining creatures, because by taking away your maximum hit points, you're creating a disparity in survivability, which means even a lower-level monster can take out a high-level character because of this particular energy-draining mechanism that's been created for fifth edition, which is that you lose maximum hit points. You don't lose your actual hit points, but you lose points off of your maximum, and therefore reduce the level to which you can put your life at risk without dying. Vampires, wights, and energy drain was actually the specific cause of one of the 4 TPKs that I've been subjected to, that I've actually caused in player groups, and it was specifically because of the lethality of energy drain being a permanent thing. If according to the older rules in earlier editions of Dungeons and Dragons, if a character is reduced to 0 hit points by this process, they themselves become a vampire under the control of the one who converted them. And so I've lost an entire party that way, as they slowly cascaded each other out of existence. It was horrible. It was terrifying, and the players actually had nightmares afterwards. So it's a good villain, but they are extremely dangerous, especially to a long-term story. In like fashion, the intellect devourers and mind flayers, that entire genre or combo where they drain your mental powers to imbecile level and then feed on them. This is a awful combination, and it while it did not lead to a TPK, it took us very near the brink of one, and it was only because there were players who actually were playing characters that weren't particularly intelligent, who actually thought their way through the fight scenes without having to engage with the flayers in any kind of mental warfare. This next one is one of my very favorites, and it actually came from the Fiend Folio, one of the secondary monster books that came out during the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons era. The Great Guardian Familiar starts off as a regular cat-like animal, protecting a specific location. It has 3 attacks: claw, claw, bite. It does minimal amounts of damage at first. Has only 1 hit dice. Has a moderate armor class, and it takes usually 1 or 2 rounds to be killed. At which point it immediately resurrects as a larger version of itself with an extra attack, extra armor rating, and an increased 2-hit armor class number, so they get stronger. They continue this through all 9 lives. So by the time you get to the end, you have a monster that has 9 plus 1, so 10 dice of hit points. It has 11 attacks because it's acting supernaturally, and it's gotten 1 new attack each round, each advance. And its armor class is now superior to just about anything out there. You literally can't land a blow on it. So by the time you get to this point, it will have, if not eliminated all the players, at least driven them back from its protection, and thereby succeeded in its goal. Generally, such a familiar needs to be handled in a different way than combat, but nonetheless it is dangerous if you do try to attack it in a frontal way, and generally it eats a party alive, so to speak. The next is one of my favorite little creatures, and you guys who know me know this is one of my favorites, but they come in several different forms: sturges, leeches, and I use will-o-wisps in the same fashion. These are creatures that by themselves don't seem to be they won't be doing too much damage, because they only get basically 1 attack, and then they do ongoing damage. But the point is that the sturges, giant leeches, and will-o-wisps can actually attack without touching the opponent, without players being aware of them. So a sturge can stab you in the back of the neck. You won't notice it because of the anesthetic that's in its bite, and so on. Same with leeches, and these will just drain life points away, and the players won't know where it's going, and they have to then physically search. In particular, nastiness are the what are called glass leeches, and these are leeches that can avoid being seen, even if you're looking directly at them, because they camouflage themselves to look like your own skin. And so, if they're properly placed at the knee or whatever, they can actually can avoid being captured or killed. And then finally, will-o-wisps. Everyone thinks of them as being the lures and the traps that lead people to their dooms, but they actually feed on the fear of the being that is being swallowed by the bog or consumed by the sturges or whatever. And so it's a really creepy way to go, to be staring at these baleful lights that are just glowing and almost smiling at you. So they are one of what I consider to be one of the most dangerous monsters out there. Of course, the next are those that would not just kill the body, but actually kill the soul. I list them here as the homunculus, imps, succubus, and revenant. And really what I'm referring to is those creatures who have come to the planet, to the world, specifically to harvest the soul of the player character, and bring them to whatever level of existence beyond this realm. And so a homunculus is a demon form, an imp is a devilish form. The succubus does it while you're awake and actually takes your soul right there on the spot because you're willingly giving it up. And the revenant usually is sent to hunt you down for avoiding your appointment with death, that kind of thing. And so these are terrifying because they take you out not only in this world but in the one to come. So they are quite dangerous and generally hit you right where you don't want to think about it. Next one I'm going to mention is a Nykos thing, but I do know there have been other stories and such that use them. I call them Mords, or I call them Deathstalkers. And of course, anybody who uses a blade, a Morgul blade, knows the same thing, and that is these are creatures that when you die fighting them, your soul is destroyed and you cannot be brought back. There is no coming back from these kinds of deaths, and so therefore there's not even a saving throw that applies. If you fail, if you are struck by the weapon, you do get one save, and if you fail to save, you are done. You're just done. If you succeed, all you succeed in doing is delaying the inevitable, because unless you find ways to counteract the effect, you will die in a number of days equal to the number of hit points you have remaining at the point when you're stabbed. So generally these are creatures that try to kill you when you're already dying from other things, because they are opportunistic in their fashion. But the point is that they kill the soul. They take the character and put him from the possible resurrection to the impossible. And then finally, of all of the monsters in the D&D, in the role-playing world, no matter what system you're talking about, the real most dangerous beings of all of them are mortals. Human beings can perform more atrocities on each other than any other species. We are deceptive, we are cruel, we are not compassionate, we are horrible beings. And so therefore they can be more evil than any other species or any other monster ever, even if you combine them all. So this is my list of what I consider to be the most dangerous monsters in role-playing games. I'd like to know what your opinion is. What do you find to be the most dangerous monsters that are out there? What would you fill a lethal, kill everything adventure with? What kind of beings would you put in there? I'd love to hear from you. I will be continuing the show, of course, after this, but I wanted to close out this portion of the video so that I can be recorded for YouTube, and I want to thank you for watching. If you like what you see, make sure you like, follow, subscribe, do all that fancy stuff on the buttons down below. And if you didn't like what you've seen, thank you nonetheless for the amount of time you spent with us, and please leave me a comment about what you'd like to see in future episodes instead. This is Jonathan Albin, and this is NycosRPG.